Burst of AK-47 rounds penetrated the brick exterior wall from an angle of 45 degrees, again throwing up a spray of dangerous fragments as they embedded themselves in the rear wall of the first room. The AK-47 easily penetrated plywood, cinder block, and brick exteriors at 0 and 45 degrees. The rounds generated secondary brick and block missiles as they entered and, in many cases, passed through the test structure. An M16 rifle was tested against the three building facades. A single M16 round, fired from straight on, passed through the plywood exterior wall, through a metal bookcase, through a mannequin with its fragmentation vest, and through an interior wall into a second room where it lodged in the rear wall. A burst of M16 rounds went through the plywood exterior, a mannequin with fragmentation vest, and penetrated into the rear second room, where they went through a metal cabinet and into a mannequin without fragmentation vest. As they exited the mannequin, the rounds dispersed into a 5-foot area in the rear wall of the second room. Three 3-round bursts from the M16, fired directly at the cinder block wall, penetrated the blocks but did not enter the room beyond. A burst of M16 fire penetrated the brick wall from straight on, generating a spray of secondary projectiles before lodging in the rear wall of the front room. A single M16 round, fired from an angle of 45 degrees, penetrated the plywood exterior, passed through a mannequin and its fragmentation vest, and entered the second room, where it passed through a second mannequin without a vest and lodged in the wall of the second room. A burst of M16 rounds from 45 degrees penetrated the plywood wall, went through the mannequin with a fragmentation vest, and penetrated into the second room. A burst of M16 fire directed against the cinder block exterior wall from 45 degrees was unable to penetrate the wall. And a burst of M16 rounds from 45 degrees was also unable to penetrate the brick exterior wall. M16 single rounds and bursts were highly effective against plywood walls from any angle, causing interior damage, including penetration of fragmentation vests worn by mannequins. An M16 burst penetrated the brick wall from straight on, but not from 45 degrees. Bursts were unable to penetrate cinder block from any angle, but it is expected that repeated impacts in the same location would eat through the block. The M249 squad automatic weapon was tested against the structure. A burst of M249 rounds fired from straight on penetrated the plywood exterior wall. After passing through the bookcase and the mannequin's fragmentation vest, the rounds lodged in the rear wall of the first room. One round bounced off a helmet near the point of entry. An M249 burst fired straight at the cinder block wall, penetrated the wall, and kicked up a spray of secondary projectiles. The rounds passed through the mannequin and its fragmentation vest before lodging in the rear wall of the first room. Next, an M249 burst was fired directly at the brick wall. A few rounds penetrated the wall, breaking off secondary brick missiles that lodged in the rear wall of the front room, along with the rounds. Serious or possibly lethal wounds could occur if personnel were in the line of fire.
3, 2, 1.
When the angle was shifted to 45 degrees, a burst of M249 fire easily penetrated the plywood exterior wall. The rounds passed through a mannequin and its fragmentation vest, went through the rear wall of the first room, and then exited the structure through the side and rear walls of the second room. Rounds from an M249 burst failed to penetrate the cinder block wall from an angle of 45 degrees. Also from an angle of 45 degrees, a burst of M249 fire was unable to penetrate the brick exterior wall. However, with this and other smaller caliber weapons, it is expected that with continued hits, the rounds would eventually eat through the walls and make their way into the rooms beyond. From straight on, the M249 was effective against the plywood and cinder block walls, but less effective against the brick wall. From an angle of 45 degrees, M249 bursts passed through the plywood wall, but did not penetrate the cinder block or brick walls. A single shot from the M40A1 sniper rifle was directed against the plate glass window to indicate obvious danger when fighting in these conditions. From straight on, an M40A1 round penetrated the plate glass and passed through the left cheek of the mannequin, exiting the rear of the mannequin's Kevlar helmet. The round continued into the wall and furniture of the second room and passed completely through the structure. The M240G medium machine gun fired bursts of rounds against the test structure. A 10-round burst fired from straight on passed through the plywood exterior wall and then penetrated a bookcase and mannequins wearing fragmentation vests. The mannequins were knocked back 3 to 4 feet as some of the rounds continued into the second room, where they passed through a mannequin without armor before exiting through the rear wall of the structure. An M240 burst fired directly at the brick wall, made a 2-inch entry hole in the wall as the rounds ate their way through the brick and continued through the entire structure. Some rounds penetrated a wall locker and lodged in the rear wall. Any personnel in the line of fire would have incurred serious or lethal wounds. An M240 burst was fired directly at the cinder block wall. The rounds ate their way through the block, making a 2.5-inch entry hole in the wall. The rounds created secondary missiles from the back side of the block wall. Projectile fragments penetrated the neck of a mannequin wearing a fragmentation vest. Secondary missiles lodged in the rear wall of the first room. There was no penetration into the second room. Fired from an angle of 45 degrees, an M240 burst passed through the plywood wall and a mannequin with fragmentation vest. The rounds continued into the second room, where they exited the structure with a large dispersion pattern. Rounds from the M240 fired at the cinder block wall from 45 degrees passed through the exterior and interior walls to exit at the rear of the structure. Not all rounds of an M240 burst fired from 45 degrees were able to penetrate the brick exterior. One that did passed through a mannequin with a vest and continued into the second room, where it went through a desk organizer before exiting the structure through a rear wall. Bursts of M240 medium machine gun fire were able to penetrate all exterior walls and cause damage within the test structure. At a firing angle of 45 degrees, the brick exterior wall offered some resistance to penetration. The M2HB 50 caliber heavy machine gun was fired directly against the cinder block and brick walls. At 0 degrees, an M2HB burst went straight through the cinder block wall and everything beyond, leaving large holes in all the walls and causing severe damage to any object in its path. Another burst of M2HB rounds produced large holes in the brick wall, showering fragments into the first room. Projectile holes in the rear wall of the room indicated that the rounds were tumbling after penetrating the brick wall. The rounds continued through the entire structure, leaving large holes in the walls. At 45 degrees, an M2HB burst penetrated the block wall with similar results. The rounds passed through the first room, showering it with fragments. They went through the back 2 rooms, passing through anything in their path, leaving large holes in the walls and furniture before exiting the structure. A burst of M2HB rounds penetrated the brick wall, went through a mannequin with fragmentation vest, and showered fragments into the first room. The rounds and fragments passed through the second room, creating a large dispersion before exiting the rear wall of the structure. Bursts of M2HB 50 caliber fire at 0 and 45 degrees blasted through both brick and block facades and continued through the entire structure, leaving heavy damage in its wake. An M82 50 caliber special application scope rifle was also tested. A single round from the M82 fired directly at the plywood wall, penetrated the wall, and passed through a mannequin without fragmentation vest. The round ripped through the torso of the mannequin before exiting the rear of the structure. The fragmentation vest would have had little effect on the results due to the terminal effect of the projectile.